Good afternoon, everyone. This is Troy Kilpatrick, the Journey Museum and Learning Center Executive Director. Man, I wish I was right there in the theater with you, but hey, this is 2022, and everything we're going to do, we're going to be able to be either online, on video, pre-recorded, or in person. That's our pledge to you as we move forward with our educational programs. So this program you're about to see is a journey discussion. And what's key to understand about a journey discussion is that we have an underwriter. And in this case, our underwriter is the South Dakota Space Consortium and NASA. And so therefore, there's no admission today for you to come and join us in our theater. And this program will be offered for free on our website. Now, as we move forward through the calendar year, you're going to see other programs called learning forums. Those programs, those are going to be an admission charge. Become a member and get in for half price. Become a member and you'll be able to also go to our membership portal and watch the program later once we've had a chance to edit it and present it for you. So there's the difference between those two programs. But what you all need to remember is that every program, you can either join us online or you can come in person to the museum to get a great educational experience. We have an awesome lineup that we'll be announcing in detail soon, but you can circle on your calendar February 25th, and you can learn more about Tinker's story. As a matter of fact, that's why I'm not here today, as I'm flying to Tucson, Arizona to help get some more background information on that. And so it's going to be an exciting program when we kick off our season February 25th. This is the first of 4 programs that we're going to be presenting under this topic of Western skies and Lakota constellations. It's because of the different seasons. And we are so grateful to welcome as our presenter one of our newest team members, Megan Ostrenga. And a little bit about Megan, just so you guys know, I mean, crazy talented. But listen to this. She got her Bachelor of Science degree, Northern Arizona University, and it was in education. It was in secondary education, primarily in earth sciences. And then she got her master's degree at Texas Tech University. And I am obligated to say Reckham on behalf of Megan there, where she got her Master's of Arts, Heritage, and Museum Sciences degree. And Texas Tech is like the cradle of museum sciences here in the United States. So we're really excited to have Megan be a part of this team. The stars in science, as you can tell with her science education background, is really something that Megan has in her back pocket. One of the things that she did before joining us is she worked at the Lowell Observatory in Flagstaff, Arizona. That is the community, the first dark sky community in the United States was in Flagstaff. So Megan cut her teeth at the Lowell Observatory, and I know you're going to see a great program here today. Just a little bit of personal note on Megan. She's only been here since December 1st, and she's just like one of the gang already. Not only has she taken on all of these science education initiatives, as I mentioned, and I'll say thank you again to the South Dakota Space Consortium and NASA for helping underwrite these programs for our community, but she's excited to also help us start to create a bigger and better archive, curate our collection, help us improve on the ability of our museum to capture the history that's important to our community, and then conversely, tell more educational stories within the museum itself. And so now, I wish I was there with you, but please enjoy Megan as we talk about Western skies and Lakota constellations. Thank you for joining us.
All right. Hello, everybody. How are we all doing today? Good. Happy Friday. I know we're looking forward to that weekend. And yes, as Troy Kilpatrick introduced me, I am Megan Ostrenga. I am the archivist curator here at The Journey. And yes, I did start on December 1st, so we're coming up on my 2-month birthday. So yes, tonight's presentation will be the Western skies and Lakota constellations, or Lakota star knowledge. And so firstly, before we start getting into specific constellations, we are going to talk about how we got constellations. So back in the day, we all thought that the whole universe revolved around Earth. So this was called the geocentric way of looking at the universe. And I mean, thinking back to those times, how else would they have thought anything different, right? We didn't have telescopes yet. We didn't have any of that technology to figure out that we're just one of the many things out there in space. And so because of that, we just thought everything was going around us. Every star was moving around Earth. And like we do now with maps, if you were to tell someone where you lived, you wouldn't tell them North America, you'd tell them South Dakota, because that's more specific. So that's exactly what we did with constellations. And so to tell someone, oh, this planet is in this part of the sky, it's easier to say, oh, it's in Virgo. It's more specific to an astronomer. And so that's how we ended up with our zodiac constellations, as I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with. And those ones were all created in that tradition of rotating around Earth. But because we've all fallen in love with our zodiacs, we've kept that tradition alive of keeping the zodiac. But what we know now is that we do not, we are not the center of everything. And one piece of evidence for that is in an image like this behind me. And these are star trails. So if you were to set up a camera in one place and leave it there all night to take time-lapse pictures, this is what you'd see. And that's us rotating. So it's not the stars moving, it's us rotating, which is pretty interesting. And then the other piece of this that we have learned is that we exist on something called an orbital plane, and we are orbiting a star, which is the sun. And this orbital plane, I always like to describe it, I have a piece of paper here. If we were to draw all of the planets and the sun onto my piece of paper, and I were to move it around through space, they'd all move together, right? It's the exact same thing. That's what our orbital plane is we're all just moving together because we are locked with our sun. And so now starting to move into some constellations, we've been talking about constellations for a pretty long time. And one of the oldest pieces of evidence of talking about constellations is in this painting behind me. And this is the Lascaux cave painting in France. It's about 17,000 years old. And this is a depiction of Taurus the bull. And so I want you to just kind of observe it for a little while. See if you can notice where maybe the stars might be. And now you can use your friends. I want you to find Taurus. See if anyone feels confident. Some of you shaking your head no here. I hope y'all online are having some better luck. Yeah, feel free, talk to your friends. I was a teacher. I am not afraid of conversation. Perfect. All right, now I want you to check your work. Was anyone right? All right, we got a couple people right. Yeah, so this is not easy to find constellations, right? Especially when it looks like that. That takes a lot of imagination to get a bull out of that shape. But back to the painting. So, okay, I can kind of see those stars. We kind of have this V right here in the face, right? So that's the bull. But the thing that really shows us that this is the constellation is this little group right here. Did anyone notice that before? Yeah, and so that actually does exist right above the constellation, right here. And those are known as the Pleiades, or the Seven Sisters. And the Pleiades are what we call an open star cluster. And there are two types of star clusters. One of them is an open one like this, and they are made up of about 100 stars that are all kind of bound together. They just kind of move through space together. The second type is a globular star cluster. Those have about 10,000 stars in them, all moving together. So when we get into the summertime, I have a great one that I'll show you along with the constellation of Hercules. So come back to see that one. It's really cool. But then moving into some of the other constellations that we know, probably one of the most popular ones and easiest to recognize is the constellation of Orion. And I'll just get into the story of Orion for right now. And Orion was a hunter, and he believed that he could defeat any beast on Earth. And the Earth goddess was like, it's pretty bold of you to think you can defeat me. So she sent a scorpion after Orion, and he did not win that fight against the scorpion. And so to help people keep their egos in check, the Earth goddess put their remains into the sky as constellations. But what's pretty cool about these two constellations is they are exactly 180 degrees away from each other. So if Orion is over here, Scorpio is over here. And as we rotate through time, I wish I had a third arm, they'll never be in the sky at one time. So if you're like, man, I used to be able to find Orion, but I really can't do it today, might be Scorpio. All right, so again, Scorpio will be around in about 6 months. And this one again, use your friends. See if you can find it. It's a little bit easier. Luckily, Orion is made up of some brighter stars. And so I'll go through kind of the drawing of Orion here. So right up here is Orion's shoulder. This star is named Betelgeuse. And then coming over, this is Orion's other shoulder. And then we'll come down here to probably what is the most recognizable part, which is his belt, those 3 stars. And then we'll come from his hip down to one foot, back up to his hip, to the other hip, back down to his other foot. And now there's 2 interpretations for this last part. Here is his sword is one interpretation, or mine is that he's kind of doing a lunge, like that's his kneecap. That's what I see at least. And so if we want to take a closer look here at the kneecap or the sword, that is the Orion Nebula. And that is where new stars are being born every single day. And so on my last check, about last week, there were about 700 new stars in that nebula. So like I said, every single day there's new little stars coming out. And that actually brings me to the James Webb Telescope. And I don't know if any of y'all have been keeping up with it, but it was launched on Christmas Day, and as of Monday at noon, it made it to its destination. So that's pretty exciting. And so this telescope's job is to be looking at things like the Orion Nebula to tell us about the history of stars, both young and old. So as we go through the year, hopefully we'll have more updates from it as it gets up and running and taking pictures. So that's exciting to look forward to. And then back to Orion. I guess the easiest way for me to find constellations is really learn like 1 or 2 and then use that one to cheat and find everything else. All right, so Orion, like I said, is an easy one for us all to learn because of his belt. And so cheating, we're gonna use his belt to draw a line right down here. And this star's name is Sirius, and Sirius is the brightest star in the entire night sky. And that is because we've learned that Sirius is actually a binary star, or 2 stars. So this is an infrared image from NASA, and you can see the second star just kind of peeking out right behind it. And so as you can imagine from here, that's why it looks so bright, because it's really 2 stars. And Sirius is actually the brightest star in the constellation of Canis Major, which is the nose of Orion's hunting dog. So Orion has 2. We have Canis Major right here, and we have Canis Minor up here. And then Canis Major is always seen following after a rabbit, which I'm sure if any of us have dogs at home. And so here is a drawing of some of those constellations we've talked about already. We have Taurus and the Pleiades up here. We've got Orion, and then we have the 2 dogs. And just one thing I want to point out really quickly is these are depicted sideways, and that is because when constellations rise in the season, they are coming up sideways, and as they pass through our night sky, they stand up. So right now, we're looking at them sideways. And then moving on to the last constellation we'll talk about for our Western constellations is Gemini. That's another one of those zodiacs that we talked about before. And Gemini is the twins, and the story of Gemini is that these 2 twins were a little bit crazy about the ladies. And they were so crazy that they would get into fights over the ladies that they liked. And one time, one of them didn't do such a great job fighting for his lady, and he died. So Pollux was the one who passed away, and Castor, that's the other twin, he was so sad about the death of his brother, he went to Zeus. He was like, can you make me immortal so I can share that with my brother so we're never separated? And so Zeus placed them in the sky together. So again, they're never separated. And then just looking at them with the other constellations, they're just right next to Orion as well. So I'll give you one moment again to look at this picture, because now there's no pictures. All right, so take a moment, see if you've learned anything. I'm sure you can see that belt pretty easily. It's always kind of fun to practice. All right, it sounds like we're starting to get it. So now we're going to move into some of the Lakota constellations. And what I'd like to point out for the Lakota constellations is that they very strongly believe in mirroring. So whatever is on Earth or in the Black Hills, they also believe is in the sky above. And so that is going to be something that I really emphasize a lot in this next talk. And so the first constellation and part of the Black Hills I'm going to talk about is the racetrack. And so that is this outer portion here. And so the story of the racetrack, or the Great Race, is that the two-leggeds and the four-leggeds were participating in a race around the Black Hills to determine who had power over who could eat who. And so this race was 4 laps around the entire Black Hills, which is a long distance. And as you can imagine, all these animals running, their feet are going to start tearing up, maybe start bleeding a little bit. That blood is staining the rocks behind them. And during the race, the magpie, this is a very hard race, the magpie flew on ahead onto the back of the buffalo. And he rode on the back of the buffalo, and right about when they were about ready to cross the finish line, the magpie flew on ahead and won the race for the two-leggeds. So that is why we get to eat other animals. And the Lakota very strongly appreciate the magpie for that. It is a sacred bird for them. And as I mentioned before, the blood stained the rocks. If we look at an aerial map of the Black Hills, you can see this red band all the way around the Black Hills. So that is the explanation for the Spearfish Formation, which is a red rock. And as you can tell, it's also a racetrack. And here's what it looks like in the sky. It's still that circle. And it's made up of some of those brighter stars that we've talked about already. We've got the Pleiades, we have Sirius down here, we have the heads of our twins. But going back to this mirroring, is they use this concept to determine when they are going to perform their ceremonies. And so the hoop is the entire Black Hills. And then if we, for example, look at the center here, that coordinates to Peish La. And that is where we do some of the spring rituals. And so what's coming up, I believe that's in May, they'll be watering the earth to help celebrate the rebirth of the plants. They'll be providing offerings for the animals. So like I said, it's a nice spring ceremony to welcome back coming out of winter. And like I said, that's at Peish La, and that's at the very center, which you can see here, there is a marking right in the Black Hills in the center. And coming back to the map, the next constellation we'll talk about is this one right here. We are going to look at this large constellation. And so we'll start with what we talked about already as the belt of Orion, those 3 stars. And so if you all feel your spine, you're welcome to do it or not, but it's bumpy, right? And so those stars represent the spine of an animal. And then our ribs are on either side of our backbone. So these 2 stars on either side represent the ribs of an animal. And then we have our head and our tail. And this animal is called Teyamani, and they don't have a specific animal, and it's because everyone, just like us, we all have different beliefs on the stories. And so some people believe that it's the buffalo, others believe it's a bird. And so oftentimes it's spoken of as just an animal being created from the center of the Black Hills, or the center of everything that is. And so next we're going to look at the Pleiades, and we have Craig Howe, who is going to talk a little bit about those.
There was a Lakota woman, and we don't know which of the Oyate she belonged to, but she was a Lakota woman, and her name was Tapun Shawin, which means red cheek woman. And she was beautiful. Of course, all Lakota girls and women are beautiful, but she was really beautiful. And so boys and men would come from all over trying to court her. But she never chose anyone. And then one night, some guy came, and they say he just acted. He was different. He had like an aura about him. And when he came, it was almost like he didn't walk. He almost just kind of floated. And she said, whoa, he's my man. So she wanted to marry him. And so he asked permission of the people if he could marry her. And they said yes. And then he said, oh, also, I'm from the stars. I'm from Mahpia Oyate. I'm beyond the cloud people. And so I want to marry Tapun Shawin, but I want to take her back with me to my home. So they just call him Starman. Starman and Tapun Shawin went up to the stars then. And they lived up there. And Tapun Shawin, before long, she was pregnant and she was ready to have their baby. And he was always out wandering the sky like stars do. But they told Tapun Shawi, do not pick any plants or dig any plants up here in the star world. They look like what you have down on Earth, but they're different, so don't do it. Well, one day she was out and she seen a plant that looked like a timsala. And she picked, so she had her digging stick. And so she thought, no one's around, my husband's off wandering the sky. My mother-in-law she's not around, I'm gonna dig this timsala. I want the taste of this timsala, remind me of home. So she dug that timsala out of the ground and she looked through the hole and she could see all the way down to her relatives down here on Earth. And so of course she got really lonely for her relatives. So she braided together everything she had. All the roots of the timsalas, any shawls or blankets, she just braided and tried to make a really long rope from the center, from that hole to the earth. And then somehow she tied it off and then she came down that rope. And she came down coming down that rope and she got to the end of the rope and she still was a long way from the earth. And you can imagine she probably hung there for a while. Then she finally got tired and had to let go and she fell to the earth and that fall killed her. Her husband came back about then and he couldn't find his wife. So what does he do? He goes over and he sees that hole and he looks through the hole and he looks down and he sees that his wife, Tapun Shawi, is dead. The stories say that he walked a little ways off and he sat down and he has never moved since then. Now, what star never moves? The North Star is exactly right. And they say that that North Star is him. And his name in Lakota is Wichachpi Owangila. He just stays in one place. And the way you can find that North Star is you take the two stars on the end of the dipper right there and draw a line between them and it'll take you to the end. Right there's the North Star, perfect. And that is also the end of the handle of the Little Dipper. So that's how you can find the Big Dipper and the North Star and the Little Dipper. Miraculously, these boys come and they see this little baby that he had been born somehow when she hit. This baby was born and he was trying to nurse like what babies do. And at first the stories say those boys seen her and they just ran. They were afraid. Then it's like they got their courage back and they turned around and they came back and they seen that little baby was alive. So they took the little baby and brought him back to the village. And people decided they would give that baby to this old woman to raise. And so she raised him and she named him Wichachpi Hinkpaya, Fallen Star. This little boy, he grew different than Lakotas grow. You know, it takes us a long time. It takes us a year to get a year older. Well, in 1 year of our time, he would grow like maybe 4 years. So when we're 4 years old, he's already 16. And he did remarkable things for the Lakota people and he protected them. And when he got to be what we would call a teenager, he said, I want to go back to my father's people up there. I'm going to leave, but I'm related to you. You're my relatives. And so I'll help you in two conditions. I'll really try to help you a lot. One is with medicines, and the second one is with natural disasters. So he leaves, and the people are sad. And Fallen Star, Wichachpi Hinkpaya, is up in the stars again. Then, long time later, we don't know how long, the Lakota people now are coming back to the Black Hills. And when the Lakota people would travel then, they would stop 4 times during the day. And then that last stop, they would camp and the men would go out and hunt and the women would set up the teepees. And these girls were all out running around playing. And as they played, they kept getting further and further away from the camp. And all at once they had a strange feeling and they looked and here all surrounding them were bears. Looking at these girls, they were hungry and they were going to kill these girls. And so the girls screamed, but they were so far away, it's not clear if the people in the village could hear them or they were too far away that they couldn't hear them. Even if they could hear them, they couldn't get to them to save them in time. And so the bears started closing in on these girls and they all covered their faces so they wouldn't see the bears eat them. So they were covering their faces and just then out of the blue comes this voice saying, stand on this little mound of earth. So all those girls, they followed what that voice said. They stood on that mound of earth, and here it was, and then he asked that mound of earth, exactly right. He asked that mound of earth, he said, now rise up, rise up. But just then, in that noise, those bears had paused, and it gave that ground time to start to rise up. Then they realized, and they just rushed in and started clawing, trying to kill those girls, grab them. But as they were clawing on the side of this earth, as it went up, it would fall off, and these big, long tubes of rock fell off and crushed all the bears, killed them all. In Lakota, they call that place Matotipila, Bear Lodge, the lodge of all those bears. All the way around that are dead bears buried in rock. And then these girls were carried up to the top, and the stories say there were 7 of them. And then Wichachwi Hinkpaya, he didn't take them with them. He said, okay, each of you 7 girls can choose your most favorite bird. And then a flock of those birds came and carried her back to their relatives here on earth.
All right, so that was the story of Devil's Tower, or Matotipila. And just like I had mentioned before, every single person, I'm sure all of us, have a different interpretation of many different stories. So another story of who was on Matotipila was actually the twins. And then a separate story is of 7 girls. And so this story is that there was a band moving through the Black Hills, and every night there was one little girl who was taken by this mysterious red bird that would fly into where they were staying for the night. And on the 7th day, Fallen Star came and he asked them, like, what's going on? Is there any way that I can help? And they described this red bird, and they said it keeps taking our little girls. And Falling Star goes and he fights this bird, and he ends up getting rid of it, which is great. We don't have to lose any more of our children. But unfortunately, he couldn't bring any of those girls back. And so what he did instead was he put those 7 stars up in the sky together so we can all remember to watch over and take care of our children. And I'm sure we remember the 7 sisters, or the 7 girls. So again, that is another story of the 7 girls. And just going through again the constellations here is we've got our hoop, which is the Black Hills. We have our 7 girls up here. We have Te Yamani, our animal, coming out of the heart of everything that is. And then the last one that we'll talk about is right here, which lines up with all of the stars that we talked about previously with Gemini.
The second fascinating story about Matotipila is that there's a constellation in the sky that has that very same name. The Lakota constellation called Matotipila corresponds to the Greek constellation called Gemini. And if you look at the shape of Gemini, it's an elongated rectangle. And when Gemini rises in the east, it's horizontal, paralleled with the horizon. And then as it rotates through the sky, it stands up. And then when it sets in the western horizon, the orientation is vertical. And it parallels the relationship and the angle of Matotipila, the landmark. So among Lakotas, Matotipila has another name, Patehechi, gray buffalo horn. When that constellation is in position to mirror the landmark, the 2 shapes suggest the horns of a buffalo bull. This is exactly what we see in the ancient petroglyphs carved into the rock of Matotipila.
And so here is an image. The Lakota constellations are on the left, and the Western constellations are on the right, and they are of the exact same portions of the sky. So I'd like you to just take a moment and look between the 2 of them, compare them, see how some of those stars are the same but utilized differently between different cultures and different groups of people. I would just want to leave you then with one last story from the Lakota people and from Craig on how they view stars in general.
From a Lakota viewpoint, when an individual is born, they are given a spirit, a wanahi, from a star. And then they live their whole life with that wanahi, with that spirit. And then when they die on this earth, that spirit leaves. And it goes into the cup of the Big Dipper. The 4 stars then carry that spirit to the Milky Way. And those 4 stars are called the carriers. Sometimes they're seen as individuals carrying a blanket with a spirit between them, and sometimes, Biko mentions this, they are horses that are carrying the spirit to the Milky Way. Now, the Big Dipper has 7 stars. The other 3 stars in the handle are the mourners. So 4 carriers and 3 mourners accompany the spirit to the Milky Way. In Lakota, the Milky Way is called the Wanahi Tachanku, the spirit trail. What we know about Lakota star knowledge is based on centuries of observations by Lakotas. Lakota homelands are perfect places to observe the stars. The Lakota peoples of the past were astute observers and critical thinkers. This exploration of traditional narratives and historical events is based on a deep reverence for Lakota star knowledge. By studying this star knowledge, we can get a glimpse into the integrated and sophisticated structure of Lakota philosophy. And it's this unique philosophy that connects the world when we and Hanwi travel together with the world of the students at Spring Creek. When Ella Deloria wrote her book, Speaking of Indians, in the 1940s, she drew on a number of sources in Lakota communities to help her to understand the past, what she called the ancient ways. So she says that these men were Christian men, mature leaders in the community at that time. And she said they had no wish for the outgrowth of the ancient way. But she then says they would tell her about that ancient way for hours on end. And she described that as they would do so with tender reverence. This idea that they were telling about the beliefs of their forefathers, and that they didn't believe it, but they gave it the respect it deserved because their forefathers believed it. These star stories would fit entirely within that realm of literature that we should show tender reverence to. Whether we believe it or not is not important. This is what Lakota ancestors believed. This is what they were telling their children. And if we want to understand Lakotas at that time, and then the connection between that time and today, then we need to study these, not as fairy tales, but as great literature.
And so just leaving you with one last image here. In the peach color is the Western constellations, and then the very colorful constellations are the Lakota. And as you can see here in this bottom little slice of our sky, that is our winter constellations. That's where we are now. And then we have 3 other seasons. And so this program will happen 3 more times this year as the skies above us change. So please mark that in your calendars. Get ready for the spring skies in a few months. Firstly, before we get into any question and answers, I want to thank a few folks. So Craig Howe, he is the one who was in those videos, and he is with the Center for the American Indian Research and Native Studies. And he helped the whole Journey Museum put together a whole video on the Lakota star knowledge. And then secondly, I'd like to thank Ron Goodman. He is the author of the Lakota Star Knowledge book. And this is a great book. You feel free to come ask me about it if you'd like. And that is where a lot of these stories have actually been written down. And then lastly, I'm going to send us to another video with our executive director for one last thank you.
As we introduce a new way for us to do programming, we're also enhancing lots of different parts of the Journey Museum and Learning Center. And back in the end of 2019, early 2020, we were grateful to receive a donation from Dr. Ray Burnett. And this donation is in alignment with being able to hear better. It's an amplification system that we've installed in our museum theater. So if you need assisted hearing by using your smartphone with our app, you're going to be able to control the volume of the presentation and what you are watching. We can't thank Dr. Burnett enough. Unfortunately, I have to say that we lost Dr. Burnett in this past week. And so Ray, who used to routinely sit in the front row for learning forum programs and turtle soups, because he was trying to hear as well as he could, unfortunately is not here for us to have made this advancement in our programs. And I want our condolences to go to Ray and his family members who've lost him. And when I was looking at his obituary earlier today, there was a great quote in there, and I'd like to share it from Ray. And that is, "Seize the day with both hands and don't be afraid to get your hands dirty." Thank you, Dr. Burnett. And I'm sure museum goers will appreciate your contributions and efforts to make all of our education programming even better. Rest in peace.
So now we can start moving into our question and answer portion. So we have Alyssa here in the back with a microphone for anyone here to ask a question. Just raise your hand and she'll come around and grab you so even the folks on Zoom can hear the questions. And then Mallory will be working the chat for those of you on Zoom who have any questions. Anyone? We've got one down here.
I'm just so curious about Dr. Howe's presentation with the Lakota names that he came up with, for each of the constellations. Is there a way to get that?
Yes, and actually those, he didn't come up with the names for the constellations. That's actually the traditional name in the Lakota culture. And so a written down version is in this book, maybe come up after and you can kind of see them written down. He has the correct pronunciations for them. Thank you, sir. Anyone else? We got one over there.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
My name is Dave Arshamble. I'm from the Sandy Rock Sioux Reservation. I just have a comment about things. I had the opportunity to experience a guy named Virgil Killstreet,
Okay.
who I think was pretty influential in saying what's above.
And how many days does that take about?
Excuse me?
Do you know how many days that takes?
How many days?
Yeah, because you said about 100 miles. 500?
100 miles a day we ran.
Okay, yeah.
And they were different.
Thank you for sharing.
Incidentally, the man up on the screen, that's my cousin.
Well, thank you very much, sir.
We're all related anyway.
Perfect. Great to meet you finally. I'll defer to an expert on the Lakota, but I know for kind of the more Western tradition, it started because we always want to have order in our chaos. And so we were just naming it of, okay, that kind of looks like a spoon, so it's the Big Dipper. So that's the Western tradition, but I'll defer to some of our experts in the room on how the Lakota may have started some of these traditions. Well, thank you, sir. Thank you very much for filling us in on that. And I think, do we have time for one more, Alyssa? No virtual. One more? In the middle, I think I saw. Well, thank you all so much for coming, and we've got some books over there. I have this other Lakota Star Knowledge book down here as well, and I'll be available for questions too. So thank you all very much for coming, and make sure you check out journeymuseum.org to keep up with our calendar and to see when the next season's constellations will be. So thank you all very much. Happy Friday.